Sharon Spano. I help entrepreneurs maximize critical systems to accelerate performance and profitability. Today, I'm excited to be on Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show to talk about the pursuit of time and money. Stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. My name is Dov Baron, and I'm here to connect you to your deep greatness. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty interview series, where today we'll be taking an insider look at the relationship between time and money, and why, no matter how successful you are, being prosperous has very little to do with how much money you have in the bank. If you're a new listener, new viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in, we're about to go full Monty. If you're a regular listener, a big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast in the world for Fortune 500 listeners, and we're also honored and deeply grateful to Inc.com, who cited us as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. So thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. And look, there are literally millions of podcasts out there, but there's only one podcast that's focused on this heart and soul of leadership, and you're tuned into it right now. So remember, we always need your help in staying relevant, so please get yourself over to iTunes, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. As a leader, whether you're a CEO, someone in the C-suite, sales leader, entrepreneur, leader in any capacity, you know that time and money are vital resources. Resources that all too often, whether we're speaking about them in a personal sense, an entrepreneurial sense, maybe with a startup, or being a corporate executive, all too often we have plenty of time and not enough money, or is the exact opposite, we have lots of money and not enough time. So what does it take to have both time and money in abundance? Well, stay tuned, because our guest today is Dr. Sharon Spano. She has a Ph.D. in human on organizational systems. She is an author, corporate business strategist, workforce expert, professional speaker, and the former host of Work Smart Live, a radio show. Sharon empowers business leaders and entrepreneurs to maximize performance, improve employee engagement, and increase bottom line results. Sharon is also a certified professional integral coach dedicated to helping others adopt new paradigms about time and money so they can step into radical abundance in every area of their lives. Her new book is endorsed by some outstanding individuals, including the great Nido Qubein, good guy, doing great work. Its title, The Pursuit of Time and Money: Step into Radical Abundance and Discover the Secret to a Meaningful, Prosperous Life. This book is outstanding, and I highly recommend it to you. So please put your hands together and welcome Dr. Sharon Spano. And the crowd goes wild.
Yes, thanks so much, Dom. It's exciting to be here with you today. I love your energy and so appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. It's taken a long time for us to make this happen, and I appreciate your patience too. It's really great to have you on the show. So let's start off, as we always do, by stripping it down a little bit and tell us, who is Sharon Spano? What is it that makes you tick?
Well, you've given the bio, but I think underneath all of that, as any of us could say, when we get down to the core of it, we're passionate about the work, we're passionate about people. And with this book, I really, really was just excited about the opportunity to share my passion for changing human consciousness, diving in deeper into human development, and hopefully transforming some lives and the way people think about these two most vital resources. So at the core of who I am is passion and purpose, and really a desire to do just that simple thing. It's change the world, just like you.
just a small
mission. Yeah, change that world.
Now, in this book, you started out with, you said in the introduction to the book, you started out with this sort of casual idea of asking people what their concepts were about time. And I think it's a very fascinating thing. One of my studies since the early 80s has been quantum physics, which questions time and the reality of time, along with my metaphysical studies, which did exactly the same thing. So I'm fascinated to just start there and say, what was the sort of most common concepts and beliefs that people came back to you when you asked them about how did they see time?
Well, it's interesting because in the early research, what we began to notice was a spectrum between scarcity and abundance.
Mm-hmm.
And on the scarcity end of it, people often, it was the common response that you might imagine. I don't have enough. Like they literally feel they're being chased by the clock all the time.
Mm-hmm.
When you get to the far abundant end, they're looking more at things like eternity and legacy and understanding that they can create time. Some even to think, and I'm one of them, that I could move time, those kind of things. And then what's interesting about the work overall is the moderate categories that we discover. And I go into some of this in the book.
Sure.
Because moderate scarcity and moderate abundance can very easily be confused by leaders or individuals themselves, in that it often looks, moderate scarcity often looks like responsibility based on the paradigms and the stories that we came up with or were subjected to in our early childhood years. So I'm looking at this not in the context of time money management, but at a much deeper context of adult human development and human consciousness, and what are our paradigms in the world, and what kind of separates those of us who are in business or leadership roles from really having a paradigm of prosperity and radical abundance, or feeling like, I can't keep up with the pace of the world and make the money I need.
Excuse me. But time and money, you just touched on it there. Those are things that I think we very clearly get the concepts of from our environment, our original environment, family, etc. I think if you grow up in a village in Africa,
Mm-hmm.
where the sun wakes you up and, the sunset chills you out, it's a very different world than waking up to an alarm clock and being filled with digital lighting constantly. And never feeling like, chasing the clock. It's a very different world from those kinds of worlds to the first world. So was that what you found, that it was very much part of the original consciousness of environmental conditioning?
Well, I would say yes to some degree. It gets far more complex than that, but I do go into a chapter where I talk about because one of the things that rose up for me and just my early curiosity about all this is how both time and money are simultaneously concrete and abstract at the same time. And I think that's partly what adds to our stress and confusion. So absolutely, I gave some examples of, being in Costa Rica, being in Sri Lanka, and really experiencing time differently as well as money when you're in countries that are developing or certainly third world. And it's interesting because in our Western mind, and I know that this happened to me in Costa Rica, where I was in a very, very poor neighborhood, and I naturally made the assumption that these people are suffering. But the longer I was there, what I realized is no, they have a wonderful, amazing, very prosperous life here. They just don't necessarily need a Mercedes in every driveway or two cars in every driveway to be happy. And so there's a lot more that I want to explore in this context, but certainly that we know, it's not too hard to figure out that, money doesn't necessarily, buy happiness. And so one of the key things that I'm often quoted as saying, and I certainly wrote in the book, is that prosperity has more to do with the mindset. It's a place to come from, not necessarily a place to get to.
Yeah, and I think that was, I really liked that distinction that you made in the book, that it's a place to come from. And I want to talk about that. We want to get into that. But one of the things was that you talked about how, you even said it a few moments ago, that this is not about time management or even money management, but more around people's beliefs around time and money. How, talk to us about the chase. This which is a big part of the book and starting on. Talk to us about the chase.
Well, if you're coming from a scarcity perspective, or what I will say from an early developmental perspective, and I'll talk more about that in a moment, you're going to have a more natural propensity to experience the chase. Because you're naturally in that place of scarcity. So what we know in the earlier developmental stages, we know there's 12 that we know of today. As we evolve, we're discovering more and more. But so the first 4 are relatively what we would call egocentric stages. That's
Right.
like birth to adolescence.
Yeah.
And then the next 4 goes into more ethnocentric stages. And 60% of the American population, the workforce as we know it, falls into that second tier, if you will. Some theorists label expert and achiever stage.
Right.
So their consciousness is different. What's so fascinating to me, Dov, is that there's a huge difference between just that expert stage of development and even the achiever stage. And so one of the nuances of that is that the expert is going to be more focused on efficiency, where the achiever is going to be more focused often on effectiveness. And have different paradigms around time and money in that context as well.
Of course.
Now, if you have someone even at an earlier stage, which is often you'll find that, I hate to say, but in prisons, in economic communities where maybe someone has gotten stuck developmentally due to trauma or drug abuse or whatever, we know that they literally do not have the capacity, I find this very fascinating, to see time beyond the moment. I mean, no surprise there. I don't understand that there are consequences for my action. So you can imagine that if I don't have the capacity to see time other than beyond this most moment that I'm living in, then I'm not going to plan for money. I'm not going to, manage calendars. Those are things that just don't happen. They're literally living, paycheck to paycheck or moment to moment. And it's just really interesting because when I get an opportunity to work in groups and we can look at the systems, and often it's family systems, because we know poverty, for instance, is generational in many instances. And you can be an interruption to what was the paradigm or the narrative or the story in your family over time. Then you have an opportunity to break some of that up. And then ideally, the transformation that I want to be a part of in the conversation is helping people be engaged enough or maybe or curious enough that they want to engage in what we'll call developmental movement and wake up and grow up into a new way of living and life and paradigm.
Well, the whole thing around developmental stages for me, of course, my background is in psychology too. And the interesting thing about developmental stages for me is that we have previously tended to put people in a developmental stage. And what I found is, and I'm certainly interested in your point of view, is that is actually not true. In the context of what I'm saying here is that you can be in a developmental stage with one thing and be in that stage and be in another stage with something else. So you can be in that second grouping, as you talked about, in the developmental stages of the achiever, etc. And yet you can have a belief system that belongs in the money side, which is in the first 4. So So when we're talking about consciousness in my field, the way that we couch that is within each stage, and they're not high, and they don't happen necessarily in a hierarchy in the traditional sense, but they do transcend and include. And so the simple way to think about it, that is, as you well know, but for your listeners, a baby doesn't stop having the ability to sit up when he learns to stand. So you transcend and you include to the next stage of development. Transcend and include,
But within those stages, to your point, there are what we know 26 lines of development. So in my work as an integral coach, I focus on 6 of those. So you're absolutely right. You might have a very high cognitive level of understanding, let's say, of whatever, but maybe your moral line of development is low. And so, we always jokingly talk about, a very smart Hitler who may be out of sync in some areas. But in that context, you also have what we call a center of gravity, which is where the majority of your consciousness kind of lands. That's sort of where and I always liken it to a mountain. So if you think of the 12 stages, the perspective or worldview that you're going to have from base camp 1 can be very robust and meaningful and very developmentally sound, but it's going to be different from the person who's on base camp 8 or 12.
But at the same time, we have and I'm sure you have too, met incredible people who are incredibly bright and insightful and aware, who have a poverty consciousness, maybe about money and maybe about time and maybe about both, who, you can have a conversation with and go, wow, what an amazing human being, yet they haven't got that. What would you say to that person? Because they may indeed get it intellectually, but that nudge out of that paradigm has not happened for them.
Right, and often that developmental growth, as you and I are talking about, it just happens maybe perhaps to not occur because they haven't recognized that they can grow further, that there is perhaps a need for it. Often what we find, and a lot of my clients, and I'm sure yours as well, would fall in that achiever stage. They're out there and they're making things happen, and it's not achiever in the traditional sense, but and I find entrepreneurs often fall in that area. But when people ask me, how do I know the difference if I'm coming from abundance, I'm making decisions from abundance or scarcity? The simplest way that I find within my leaders is to notice if you're making fear-based decisions.
Right.
If you're driven by fear, and fear can be a catalyst for a lot of great things, as you know. But I do a lot of somatic work, and so it's helping people tap into those subtle energies of the body. When you're having those gut reactions to things, and you're scared all the time, or you're making decisions that maybe aren't even producing the results that you're looking for, then there's some opportunity there for some transformative growth. And I had a CEO come in the other day, and he just said, "Sharon, I have literally no self-awareness. Like, I needed this work 20 years ago." And that's just the best news ever, right? I said, well, great. Then, we're ready to roll then, because, in 2 sessions, he already began to see that there was a lot more work to be done there. And that's the first step. I always say with the first moment of awareness comes opportunity for change. And it's incremental change most often. But to your point, sometimes we'll see, we typically say it can take up to 2 years for someone to have a shift developmentally. Mm-hmm. And that's if you're doing the work on your own consciousness. And many people don't know how to do that. That's why they need people like you and I. Yeah. But I find, too, if there's a dramatic change, like a loss of a job or a loss of a loved one, then sometimes that kind of spearheads people's interest in knowing I need something a little bit more. It's unfortunate that sorrow and failure and trauma are often are catalysts, but it works that way. And
yeah, absolutely. And I definitely want to come back to that. But I'm still, I think we could spend an hour on this section alone because it's fascinating. This misalignment between knowing and shifting, So it's one of the things I hear with people. I read this book and it's so great and I get it and it's right, but they don't seem to have the capacity to shift. Even with a coach, they've had a coach and they've worked with a coach and they've done some great work, but that capacity to shift, that fundamental belief system, particularly around time and money, is a fascinating piece because and for me, because of the psychology piece, because it's so ingrained in childhood. Right. Right. I mean, I've got a client that I work with and he constantly puts himself into a financial challenge. But he does it to prove that he can always come out of it. And because he's masterful. Yeah. He's masterful at creating an extra $150,000. Like from thinking on Monday he's going to go bankrupt to Thursday, I just got a check for 150 grand. Yeah. And I'm like, and he's done this consistently, and it has taken time. It's taken about 10 years actually. But now he's like, that's just what I do. And so he's actually okay with going, and now I'm going, well, you don't actually have to bottom out. And in the last 2 years, he hasn't bottomed out. But that shift is interesting. And I'm really interested in your point of view on it and from your developmental studies and from the specific focus in time and money.
Well, one of the things that Bob Keegan out of Harvard teaches is our resistance to change. And he was one of the early developmental theorists. And he's really proven that part of the reason that occurs in an individual is because there's a payoff when we don't change. And it's certainly more complex than that and his way of addressing it. But for the gentleman you're describing, I would say, yeah, the payoff is I love the adrenaline rush, and I get to be the hero at the end. But in terms of making the shift, the reason that I was drawn, because I really have based my work primarily in consulting, because I'm so interested in systems, and I do a lot of leadership development, things of that nature. I shifted to integral coaching because it aligns so well with the transformative work that I wanted to see occur in my clients around some of these areas. And why I love integral, and I think you'll find this interesting, is again, it's if you can remember, you have children?
Yep.
Okay, so if you can remember imagining what it might be like to have a father, you could have read a million books on that, but until you had that child, you didn't know what it was like. Well,
Different
I see
story
that
altogether.
Yeah, it is. We're never prepared for parenting.
Parenting is a lovely concept.
Yeah, and it changes all the time. So here's the thing that what I see with our clients is, you can talk about the change that needs to occur. You can talk about a shift in consciousness. They can imagine themselves there, but only to a point. So what the integral work does that I love is we use metaphor. So we talk about it as, here's your current way of being. And there's a lot of analysis behind that has to do with consciousness, states, stages, lines of development, all those things that we have to do on the front end. And it gives them a visual of, this is my way of being, and we want to honor that. We're not saying it's wrong. We're saying these are the great things about who you are as a successful leader, but here's where there might need to be some additional work, or here's what this way of being is closing down for you. And then after time, we move them to what we call a new way of being with a different metaphor. And it is so powerful. Like, I'm seeing the fastest results with clients that I've ever seen. Naturally, you have to do the work, and you have to, develop practices for them to make that shift in consciousness. But the metaphor alone gives them a visual. It's sort of like, imagining yourself in the skinny jeans. You've got to, if you want to lose the weight, you got to have the skinny jeans that you look at in your closet every day. Otherwise, forget it. And it sounds kind of hokey, and it sounds like a technique, but it's far greater than that. I mean, sure. I can literally see clients in 2 to 3 sessions make the shift. And then in that context, depending on what it is we're working on, the time and money always comes up. Because again, those are the 2 resources that we're dealing with every day, and we're making hundreds, at least dozens of decisions every day on how we access those resources.
Yeah, this is a fascinating area, particularly in the context of high-level entrepreneurs who are creating startups who go through a lot of this cycle of boom or bust, which is, tends to be in that dichotomy between the 2 places. So it's a very interesting thing. Talk to us about the cycle of freedom.
Well, this was something that kind of rose out of the work itself. As you know, when you write, you start out with the concept, and then you discover things along the way, and certainly when you're interviewing people and whatnot. But I began to see the secret to me to radical abundance has to do with really understanding and embodying stewardship. Mm-hmm. And, stewardship is an old biblical term that goes back thousands of years. And But it, in recent times, we talk about it in the context of sustainability and, what can I do to really honor my time, talent, and resources. If I'm in scarcity, I'm not going to do that very well. Mm-hmm. And so what I began to see in the individuals who did embody radical abundance was they had a greater sense of generosity. And from that stemmed greater gratitude. And then from that, more compassion and self-compassion, so that if I made a mistake in my business or whatever, it's just seen as a learning opportunity, and they move on. It doesn't tear them down and pull them back. And then out of that also was birthed greater generosity and compassion and gratitude for all of humanity. Right. And that gets to be a very, later stage, high level way of thinking. And then the other piece of that I really want to stress is that, in my experience, I don't think people are one or the other all the time in terms of scarcity or abundance. Life hits you, You can very easily, if you lose a job, move into places of scarcity. I would say that someone whose center of gravity is higher level, would more readily move out of it quicker. I know my husband is quite fascinating to me because he epitomizes abundance, and he's a land developer. And so, for instance, if he's working on a land deal, it never occurs to him that it's not going to come to fruition. And if you ask him, what's your B plan? He'll say, what do you mean? Because he never really has a B plan. But what he actually has is an A to Z plan. Because the minute something isn't working over here, he's already shifting to the next deal, the next guy, the next whatever. And he just makes it happen. He never takes the time to go, oh, I failed here.
Right.
He's on to the next thing. And I think successful entrepreneurs probably find themselves in that.
Part of that abundant thinking is adaptivity.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Rather than it being a stop, it's a call to adapt. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the difference for and I've talked about this on other shows where I think there's an interesting piece in the, you set the target, and I'm going for this target, and that's what I'm aimed at. And it's the paying attention between the way you just described your husband, which is I'll adapt and I'll just find a way. But also the piece that I think that gets missed is the willingness to stop and say, but am I aimed at the wrong target? Because sometimes you can adapt and you're just aimed at the wrong target.
Exactly.
So you're adapting and you're moving forward towards a target that's actually a poor target for you personally. And I think that's the self-knowledge piece. That's the willingness to say, who am I? What really matters to me? So that's an interesting piece in and of itself. Where do you feel like most leaders are failing in the context of what it is you're talking about with time and money and the belief systems around that and abundant thinking?
Well, obviously it's unique to each leader, but I think one of the trends that I've noticed in leadership has really occurred since the big crash in '08.
Right.
I've seen more leaders fall into fear-based conversations, because they're being scrutinized a lot more. Mm-hmm. People seem to be afraid of taking the risks and the chances. And I think part of that, this is just my opinion at this point, is that the world has picked up the pace. Our technology is just changing so rapidly. Absolutely. That they haven't figured out how to adapt their leadership yet. They can't keep up with the trends. And so, the whole idea, as you well know, of a 5-year strategic plan is just impossible. So how do you forecast in today's market? I'm finding that it's a real challenge. And it is, part of my research was in wisdom. And so part of wisdom is what you just addressed, which is, the ability to adapt and handle adversity and all of those nuanced, perspectives that surround leadership. And what I'm excited about, and I know you have a heart for this as well, I love working with millennials because they literally throw the spaghetti up against the wall. And if it doesn't stick, they move on and they create something else. And I think that our baby boomer leaders who are still in the game have a lot to learn from them because they just have grown up in this rapid pace society and in a global society, and they know how to play in the sandbox. Now, it doesn't mean they don't need the wisdom of the baby boomers and they can't learn as well from us. But I just find this an evolutionary period in time that is very, very exciting. And if we can just learn to continue to explore all these nuances of the time that we're in the context of time and money, of course, because that's what I'm excited about, I think we're gonna make some huge leaps forward in our own way of doing business in the very near future.
So what do you see as one of the ways for our viewers, our listeners, to for themselves to break some of these paradigms that are often generational, but how do we help them right now as listeners, as viewers, to examine and potentially break a paradigm around time, money, lack or abundance, lack towards abundance?
Well, the first thing, to me, it always goes back to awareness. So we have a simple assessment on my website that I always invite people to take, and it's
Tell
free.
people where to go for that, if you wouldn't mind.
That's at SharonSpano.com, or they can go to theTimeMoneyBook.com and download it there. But, a simple thing that I would offer your listeners that I use in a lot of my speaking engagements is I'll literally have my participants take out a piece of paper, literally write at the top, what do you believe about money? Do a stream of consciousness writing just for a few moments and see what shows up. I actually have many reflective practices in the book that are helping people explore some of the paradigms. Do it again for money, because here's one of the stories that I love to tell that sparked my curiosity in this whole context was, and I think any leader can relate to this. I had a gentleman who was quite bright that I hired into my company some years ago, and I had great hope for his ability to break me in to other markets. And I put a lot of time, energy, and money into training and developing him, and he just wasn't able to produce. And one day we were at a conference in California, and I asked, this question just came up out of nowhere, and I asked him, what do you believe about people who have money? I don't even know why I asked it. And he said, I think they're greedy, oppressive, and egocentric.
Wow.
Yeah, that was my reaction, Dov. And so I said in that moment, I don't know if I spoke it out loud or I just thought it, but I remember for sure thinking, well, no wonder I can't get you to make any money. Why would you want to be like those guys? And he came from a ghetto environment where he had been told since he was a small child, you're never going to be anything. And he really believed that those guys deserved it, deserved success, and I don't. And I couldn't break through that with him at the time. I mean, we eventually parted ways. But it kind of perked a curiosity in me, and I started to see, wow, these stories really permeate the way that we do business every day and live our lives even. So the quick way is to start to, some of the practice I start out with in the book, for instance, are notice today how much money comes up in your mind as you're out and about in the world, and how many times you're maybe feeling uncomfortable about it. Oh, I've got to pick up somebody's lunch, or I don't want to have lunch today because I don't want to spend the money, or whatever the story is. Or are you coming from a generous spirit, and what does that look like? One of the other PDFs that we have on the site that's also in the book is the matrix that showed up for time and money and the categories around that, one of them being generosity and how I think about the future. And you can see it literally laid out across the spectrum from scarcity to abundance. And it's simple, and it's kind of cool to help people go, oh, I'm in this area, I'm here, but in maybe this area, I'm over here.
Yeah, I mean, using the example of the young man you just talked about, you were working with him, you liked him, he liked you, probably thought the work was very valuable. So cognitively, it all made sense. But right. The unconscious belief, and that's what I'm saying about shifting that paradigm. Ram Dass said all enlightenment starts with awareness. Yeah, but it doesn't finish there. Right. And like the Buddhists say, enlightenment takes but a moment, but 500 years in preparation. Yeah. Right? So what I'm trying to get from you right now is this, in this moment here is, okay, so the person has the awareness. Now what?
Yeah, and then we go to practical. We go to practical practices that help them really shift behaviors. And then I send them to one of my buddies that are into time money management, because I firmly believe until you have that shift, you can do all the money and time management things on the planet. It's not going to change your world. No. I was one in my early days. I just knew every January if I had the next best Stephen Covey leather time management system, I was going to have my best year ever. And it never quite worked out that way, And so until I had the shift in my own thinking about my time. So yeah, it's attitude, our awareness, shift and consciousness or attitude, then behavior. And we do that through practices and things that are very practical. And then, again, out to really maximize that with some of these amazing productivity systems. And certainly there's plenty out there. I'm not trying to get in the money management business by any stretch of the imagination. Mine's all about what's in the head.
So here's what's interesting, because you touched on it in the beginning, and I said I wanted to come back to it, and I do. And you know this from your psychological background and developmental studies. The concept of change is different than the reality of change. The catalyst for it is often pain. In my story, I think that I fell off a mountain, got smashed to pieces. And there are these moments that are what I call a fall. Mine was literally a fall off a mountain, but for some people it's a bankruptcy, or it's a horrible diagnosis, or a divorce, or whatever it might be. What has been an example of your fall, and how did it shift you?
Well,
I think we all go through them.
Right. We do. If you live long enough, you're gonna have it. I had a son born with a very rare metabolic disorder, and in those days you didn't have the amnio. We didn't see it coming at all. Here we were, a young married couple, and we were we waited till we had our careers going and timed everything. We had the house, and then we had this baby born with a life-threatening metabolic disorder. So our boy was supposed to live to 2. He lived to 27.
Wow.
Yeah. So there were a lot of life-changing episodes, along that journey. But certainly the most dramatic would be the birth and his death in '08. And that really shifted me tremendously, because you just have to go deep within and figure out how, I didn't want to just survive. I wanted to thrive, and I wanted to continue contributing. I wanted my work to flourish and be even more meaningful as a result of the experience of Michael. So that was huge for me. And I see those stories. We all have our own story, but that was it for both of us. I think my husband and I. He would agree.
But for me, that's a very interesting one, because you have this son born with this rare metabolic sickness. He's given 2 years to live. He lives for 27. How does that impact the way you look at time? Right? Yeah. I mean, because every day is potentially the end after about 2 years. Right?
I'll tell you, that's a great example, because, and I write a little bit about that in the book, just as because I really want people to understand this isn't just all theory. I mean, I've lived it. Sure. And so the first 2 years, I was just scared to death. Like, I literally thought every day when I walk in his room, he's not going to be breathing. And I literally made a decision one day: we can't live like this. We're going to focus on quality of life. And thank God I did, because then we celebrated everything. I mean, because I never knew, is this our last Christmas? Is this our last Groundhog's Day? Is this our last Valentine's?
Sure.
So everything, we traveled a lot. My son loved to travel, and he had such a meaningful, you talk about a meaningful, prosperous life. He lived 60 years in 27. And so time, but then there was the issue of money. He was critical for 4 years. And so you're living in, what if our insurance gets canceled? And, my insurance, our family insurance was like $2,700 a month,
sure.
Just out of the gate. And so, you're always wondering, are we going to hit the mark where they just shut us off? So, yeah, those things are all real. And again, relative to every individual, every family. But I will say that even through all that trauma of his illness, we stayed focused on quality of care, a lot of humor in our house. We were both, I had the biggest client base ever during that time. And my husband and I both, I mean, he was managing a ridiculous amount of jobs, and we just did our best to make Michael first. We didn't have any supports. I had one woman that came and helped, and we would, that's the beauty of entrepreneur. We would say, okay, who's got the tightest schedule this week? Well, I'm speaking in Palm Beach, and and we would just juggle it. And we were exhausted when it was over. I will say that, but you do what you have to do, right? That's just the game. You play the hand you're dealt, and you look at it as best you can. And at the end, kind of the shift in abundance for me was, wow, I was blessed with him for 27 years.
But as I said, it would have been easy to go the other way, because he could pass at any moment, and it feels like there's a shortage of time because he could pass at any moment. It would be easy to go into lack around money, because having a sick child in the United States is not a cheap thing. It's not like you're living in the UK or somewhere where there's a national health service, or Australia. So there's a different world. So, this is why I'm asking you, because I think it's a very great illustration of what it is, a really great illustration of what it is you're talking about, because it would be very easy to go into lack of time and lack of money. And I wonder if the greatest shift came in the process, or did it come after? Because
No.
I know that for me, people talk about this all the time. People say, that must have changed your life. And I always say to people, you know what? I don't believe for a second that the fall changes people's lives. And they go, really? And I go, no. It's only when things can return to normal and you can do the same old shit you've always done. And then you go, no, hold on a minute. I have to do something different. That's what I'm interested in.
Yeah, well, I think for us, I mean, we are natural entrepreneurs. We were naturally people who wanted to be successful, and we worked hard before Michael was born. We were married 7 years before he was born. So we were on that, pace of the entrepreneurs, on the success track anyway. So it was natural for us. And I remember for myself thinking, I won't be able to do this, and I won't survive his death if I don't do the work on me. It was like I knew right away I got to put the oxygen on my own mask first,
Wow.
or the mask on my own face first. And so I was hypoglycemic. I cleaned up my eating. I mean, I did a lot of things to get myself to the highest level I could, at least physically. And then I was always doing the spiritual development, back to the lines, cognitive development, learning. We both did it in our own ways. But I know that it prepared us. And we joke about, gosh, if I don't know that I would have done as well if he died a lot earlier, but sure. I have 27 years to prepare. And I joke about Michael getting to the pearly gate and St. Peter saying, where you been? You were supposed to be here like 25 years ago. And my son saying, well, what can I tell you? My mom took a lot longer than we thought to get it together, because she was a lot of work. And it's sort of like he knew, okay, she's good now, and I was up to the actual moment.
Wow.
The actual moment when I said, son, it's time. You've got to go now because I need to go. We were in the hospital for 17 days, the last 17 days. And I just said, you got to go now because I need to go home now. It's time. And literally he died in an hour. I mean, you hear those stories, right?
Course, yeah.
But he was hanging on for us. I mean, we're convinced of that. And I had to be so exhausted that I finally just had to let go. And then it was, you got to get your health back and do all the things that and I had literally like probably 2 years of, working like you would as an entrepreneur, but confused, like, what does my work mean now? And how can it be different? And I want it to be deeper, and I don't want to do what I used to do in the same way.
And that's what I want to ask you. How did it change your work? Did it change your philosophy around the work you were doing? Because often we don't, people think, oh, it changes you radically. But often I think on the surface, like I know when I fell, I had a breakdown about 9 months in, and I said, that's it, I'm done. I'm not speaking anymore, I'm not writing anymore, I'm not working one-on-one with people. I was done. 9 months after that, so 18 months after the fall, I was back working with people and speaking. And people said, I thought you weren't going to do it. And I said, I'm not doing it. And they go, well, you are. And I go, no, I'm just not doing it from the same place.
Right. Yeah, it did change for me. And part of it because I was slated to go into a Ph.D. program. I'd been accepted when Michael got ill. Mm-hmm. And then I couldn't go. And I literally was reapplying the day he went back in the hospital. I literally had just pushed the send button when I got the call. We got to call an ambulance because he was living, separate from us at that time. So he died in September. I started my Ph.D. in March just because I didn't know what else to do. And then that's where everything shifted for me. And I did stop speaking. And I still don't speak like I used to. I don't feel that I have the same voice.
No.
Like I have a different way of working now. I don't want to be on airplanes every 5 minutes. And I work very hard and I'm very dedicated to my work and my clients, but I do it differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's like I said, I think the change is often, for those on the outside, it seems like nothing's different. But for us who get it, it changes us radically in the way that we approach the thing we do. I mean, I always said that before I fell, I fixed people. Now I know I can't fix anybody.
Right.
Exactly. I no longer fix anybody. I facilitate them doing whatever it is they want to do with themselves to be extraordinary, to tap into their deep greatness. But I know I can't do it. Whereas before, I think I thought, yeah, it's me. I'm doing it.
I think I shared that as well. And now for me, it's more about creating the space for it. And I don't feel the pressure the same way. Yeah. And I'm grateful for the people that I get an opportunity to work with, but I'm not as apt to get too caught up in, because I would lay awake night thinking, okay, this is going on. We got to change that system, this system. I don't do that anymore. And I don't know if that's just an age thing, but part of the gratitude that came for me, and this was literally a decision that I made, was, okay, I had 27 years of this extraordinary young man, and he was such a joy, but I'm still young enough, theoretically, to impact.
Sure.
To impact people. And so there wasn't a moment where I thought, oh, I just need to take a year off and mourn. Now, I was conscious of mourning.
Of course.
I mean, I did all the things that I needed to do to give myself that space. But I remember saying, I'm going to probably grieve the rest of my life, but I'm not going to mourn my whole life.
That's a really great distinction.
My son was about joy. After 9/11, we were all so devastated here in the States. And I remember my son probably 2 months in saying, Mom, I think it's time for us to be happy again. Mm-hmm. And so that's always in my head, that my son, and actually he died in September. Christmas, we usually do a big thing in our house. And my husband just said, I can't do that this year without him. Let's go to Paris. And we had never been. And I said, Michael would love that. Michael would just be like going, oh, my parents are so cool. They're going to Paris for Christmas. And we did. And it was just like, it was such a spiritual journey to be in that beautiful city. And it's not as commercial at Christmas as the States. Right. It's more of a family holiday. And I'll never forget it. It was like a life-changing Christmas for me. My first Christmas without my son. And we had planned to stay out really late so we could sleep through Christmas Day because we didn't want to have it, But we did stay out late, but we got up and had a beautiful Christmas Day up at Sacré-Cœur overlooking the city. And I just thought, that, there was just such gratitude that
it's amazing,
we have that sacred time together and think about him and remember all the Christmases before. But live in the moment of, we have a new reality and a new normal now.
Yeah. I believe that the most successful people in the world are obsessed. And we have a lot of negative connotations around that. But I think that people like Gandhi was obsessed. I think that people like Nelson Mandela was obsessed. I think that the great leaders of the world are obsessed. And not necessarily in a negative way. And what I mean by that is the thing that I'm obsessed about, if I see it in a movie, it's the part of the movie I talk about. If there's a book that comes out about it, I have to read it. If there's a conversation going on over there that I'm not part of, I'm going over there because I want to be part of that conversation. You're highly successful and you've done a lot of amazing things. What are you obsessed with, Sharon? What would you say is your obsession?
Well, I think it's transformation, personal and professional transformation, because I'm very concerned about the direction of the United States right now in terms of the poverty. I live in Florida. We've got now an influx of Puerto Ricans coming in because Puerto Rico was wiped out, and we've basically ignored them, I'm ashamed to say. Yeah. And so I feel that we are becoming a nation of the have and the have-nots. And to me, there's no excuse for that. Like, I think we can pour our hearts and minds in to some of these cultures and family systems and help people understand that they can maximize who they are and that they have gifts and talents. And the other thing is that, we're falling into so much categorization in the United States. I mean, I think it's happening everywhere, obviously with all the different religious sectors and things of that nature. But we have to learn to coexist and respect each other's different perspectives. When you see people in the later stages of development, they're able to do that. They're able, I'm a woman of faith. I'm a woman. I hate to even say Christian because that has so many connotations, but I am a follower of Jesus. But in that context, I love and respect Muslims and Hindus, and because that's what he did. It's the church that's made it us against them, and I can't talk to you because you're in the LGBTQ community and all of that nonsense. That's not what. If Jesus were alive on the earth today, his best friends would be in the LGBTQ community. I can almost guarantee it. So somehow I think there's so much work to be done to help people shift their awareness that we're all human beings and we're all challenged and stressed, whether it be time or money or family losses or falls off mountains. And when you get to the nature of the human being and the essence of the human being, we're all the same. You know, we want to be loved and we want respect and we want dignity. And that's the work I want to be about. Time and money to me was just a vehicle, a tool to tap into. There's a chapter in the book called The Window of the Soul. And it's just a way to talk into what is really going on in your life. And radical abundance to me is about intentionality, congruence, passion, you know, really knowing where I put my heart there, you know, where I put my treasure, there my heart is also, as we say in scripture. You know, what is it that I value? Like you've talked about a shift and how you think about your world as a result of perhaps facing a limited amount of time and you know, a fall. I don't know that a lot of people get those opportunities that you and I have had to really look at life and go, you know, I want to maximize every moment of this, and I want to make a difference for people.
Well, like I said, I think that we all have falls. But as I said, I think that people assume the fall is going to awaken you. And I don't believe that for a moment. I know because I didn't have a fall. I had 4. It was the last one that counts. The first one, I fell 70 feet off Bluff Knoll in Western Australia. So, you know, it's not the fall. It's not the event. It's what comes after when things can become normalized. And I remember people asking me in the first 9 months, how you doing? I mean, I was all smashed to pieces, wired and reconstructive surgery. And I'm like, I'm great. I'm coming back. You know, it's like, there is no back. I mean, it wasn't until I got to that I had to go, okay, look deeper. And I think that this is part of the challenge. And as you know, you and I know from developmental psychology, most people will never take that look, because in order to take that look will mean the willingness to examine what I might have to give up. And what I might have to give up is my normal. And my normal is, as I say, normal is not healthy. It's just what you know. And that willingness to give up what I know, which is then wired into my lower levels of development, which is my survival mechanism, that's a challenge. And I don't judge people for it. I understand it, because I was born in a ghetto too. I understand that world. Mm-hmm. But it is extraordinarily difficult to walk away from the very thing that has been your survival essence and say there's something better. Conceptually, that's why I asked the question right at the beginning. Conceptually, I get it. People say, oh yeah, I get that, and then repeat the pattern. I mean, one of the things that got me to study psychology, people ask me, well, what got you into psychology? Oh, that was easy. I watched my mother replace my father with another man exactly like my father. Yeah, some things were better, no doubt about it, but, you know, was still a womanizer, you know, still did all those kinds of things. I watched my aunt replace man after man after man with the same man. And I remember being a little kid thinking, this is the same guy. You know, I watch people go into jobs and shit about their bosses and complain about their bosses and go, you said the same thing about the last one. You know, It didn't take me long to work out you're the common denominator. So it's even though these were, and by the way, these were not dumb people. So you don't go, oh yeah, well, they're just thick. No, these very often were very bright people. It wasn't about intelligence. It wasn't even about awareness. It was about
here's what I would say.
What's familiar.
What's so fascinating to me about what you're saying is how the context that I would address that is, again, in the earlier stages, it's a first person perspective. You don't have a second person perspective. So what happens, I come from my dad was married 5 times to the same woman practically. Yeah, so exactly. What I know is like he never could see the patterns because it was all about I'm the victim and she was a bad wife. Like they don't have the capacity for a second person perspective. So part of the work that we do in integral coaching is practices that help people literally put themselves in someone else's shoes. That's why when the guy came into me the other day and said, I have zero self-awareness, like when he actually had an exercise that caused him to pretend he was the person listening to himself, he was astonished at how he sounded, you know? And so then you get into third person perspective, you get into fourth and fifth person perspective, which is pretty advanced. But we can't see our own patterns often, that's where the cycles of the family systems and the generations of poverty and scarcity and all that just self-perpetuates. And the guy that I told you about that worked for me, I mean, the saddest part of that story was, I began to see, okay, this is a pattern. Like I heard about this already, but I thought it happened 10 years ago in New York. But no, it's happening right now in my company here in Orlando. And that guy just keeled over on August 27th and died.
Oh, my goodness.
And I thought, it just broke my heart when his sister called me, because I thought, it never shifted for him. He'd lost yet another job. He was going through another. She did say that he was spiritually grounded more so than he'd ever been. I hope so. But, tragedy for his children, and his wife, because he just never, could quite get there. And that's the power when we're held by, that's why I start the book with, what are your early childhood stories? What were the narratives? Because most of them, we don't even know they're impacting us in the here and now. We do on the bigger levels, like, if my dad was an alcoholic, I might be an alcoholic, I better watch out kind of thing. But not in the nuances of time and money. Like that guy had no idea that little boy still lived inside and he was sabotaging his own success.
Absolutely.
No concept of it.
We are coming very close to the end. I want to ask you, what's the one thing you hope, Sharon, that our listeners, the leaders who are tuned in, what's the one thing you hope that the leaders will practically get out of today's show?
I find a lot of leaders live in scarcity. I think I alluded to that earlier. Mm-hmm. And so I'm, again, hoping if they access the book or just hear us today, that they'll examine their own paradigms, maybe explore a little bit into their own internal storylines around scarcity versus abundance. And more particularly, we talk about the we space in my business a lot. How are their storylines or their paradigms impacting the way they're leading and interacting with the people in their environment, corporate or otherwise?
This has been a fabulous show, fascinating. Thank you for joining us today. It's been great having you here. I would really like for you to tell our listeners, our viewers, where they can find out more about you and all of the resources that you offer.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed our conversation. SharonSpano.com, and that's SP as in Peter, A-N-O. And I know you'll have all that on your show notes. And the book, can get it there. The book is also linked to theTimeMoneyBook.com, and obviously you can get it at any of the major bookstores or Amazon.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much. It's been great having you here. I really hope, as always, that people will not just listen, but actually stop and not just play it in the background. Stop, take notes, pay attention, and raise their own awareness, and hopefully take some very serious action. We want to thank you, Sharon, for joining us today. It's been a pleasure and an honor.
Same here. Thank you.
And I hope you'll stay with us to the end as we say goodbye to everybody else. I want to remind you, dear listener, that the research consistently shows that the biggest challenges facing the most successful companies is somewhat counterintuitive, that the fastest growing companies are often hit where they realize that they're spending a fortune on attracting and training and developing talent, also having them leave them at an alarming rate. If you're sick of investing in the training and development of your talent, only have them leave you before you get your ROI, then come and speak to us at fullmontyleadership.com, fullmontyleadership.com, where we provide you with the essential leadership skills to rekindle and amplify the hidden loyalty assets inside of your organization by assisting you in tapping into your purpose. fullmontyleadership.com, providing you with the concrete soft skills to get you and your organization to the top and keep you there. Why? Because you can't outsource authenticity. And remember, get yourself over to the Matrix, matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. Matrix, you don't need the W dot. Matrix.fullmontyleadership.com and get your authentic leadership matrix self-assessment tool. It's valued at $197, but because you're a regular listener, you get to go use it, test it, and find out where you stand in the 5 areas of authentic leadership. fullmontyleadership.com. Get over there. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us today. And as always, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about your concepts of time and money, and maybe where they could shift and make you live a more prosperous, abundant life. Till next time, this is Dov Baron, and I'm out.